Welcome back to Foiling Week 2021 and the Gurit Forum. I am your host, Chris Museler, and my co-host, just the two of us right now for this session, is Andrew Pindar, reporting from Lago de Garda and Foiling Week. Unfortunately, my passport is still held up, which kind of stinks, but we get to have wonderful guests like David Graham, the current CEO of World Sailing. And one of the most important things that we can do in Foiling Week is connect communities. And we're seeing that in the wind board sports, in the design and engineering, with sailing sports, with coaching, all the way through with diversity and talking to people like Jonquel Hackenberg from the Magenta Project, trying to create more opportunities for women in professional sailing. So we connect all these communities, but the one thing we don't get to do too often, which we should do more of, is connect our community, which is part of the greater sailing and wind sports community and even beyond, with World Sailing, which is the federation that administers our sport and is the most important organization in most of our lives, and also it administers sailing in the Olympic Games. So welcome, David Graham.
Thank you very much, Chris.
It's good to have you here. And so before we get into, well, I guess the topic that we're talking about here is keeping up with hydrofoiling. Manufacturing, recreational sailing, training, race administration, all over the place. Hydrofoil sports have developed faster than organizations are prepared, and even whole industries are prepared to move. So we're finding that hydrofoils are slowly moving into the transportation space, slowly moving into recreational sports, and federations like World Sailing or any of the member nation authorities, those organizations have a lot of bureaucracy, for lack of a better word, to make change. So we're going to talk about the challenges that World Sailing has and also the bright lights that World Sailing has taken advantage of this new trend towards hydrofoils and the doors that they open. But before we get going on that, I want to just ask David, we like to ask a lot of our guests, where was that first spark with sailing, and what drove you to already create a career for yourself and become eventually the CEO of World Sailing?
Thanks very much, Chris. Yeah, my first spark for sailing, I guess I had three sparks. The first one was definitely from my father, my late father, who he wasn't a huge sailor, but when we went on holiday, we always towed an Enterprise behind us, and we went to Anglesey and every summer. And that's where I really sort of the first time that I'd been sailing, and I found myself had an affinity with it, and I enjoyed it. And I lived in California for a while, and I was racing an Olsen 30 in California.
Great fast boats.
Yeah, straight after I failed my A-levels for the first time. And that was the point when I decided actually that not only did I want to carry on having sailboat racing in my life, but wanted to work in the sport. And the more recently, probably 5 years ago or something, I started kite surfing, and that was a whole new sensation. And in between that, done lots of dinghy racing, club racing, and some big boat racing, not as much, but spent many seasons racing with my wife on a Formula 18 around the European circuit.
Cool.
So as a sport, I've always done it, and professionally, I haven't worked in any other industry since I started my career way back when.
Great. And so for World Sailing's concern, I mean, it's a big place to be. I worked for US Sailing, which is our MNA, and on the media side of things. And I was always kind of nervous and in awe of the responsibility, of, a lot of people, a lot of different interests in the sport coming and asking you to do stuff or not do stuff. So what was that, don't give me the whole pathway, but when you became CEO of World Sailing, did you have any kind of things on your radar screen that you wanted to achieve, or something that stood out as something really important that maybe wasn't being done, but that should be?
I think, my pathway, without going to all the details, I mean, I started on the beach, sort of teaching sailing, and then managing sailing, and then in the equipment. I worked for Laser for a decade, and then ran a sort of socio-economic program for the Sultanate of Oman, which was using the sport of sailing as a vehicle to promote tourism and get the local Omanis into sport.
Yeah, and that's borne a lot of fruit as well. We see around the world.
Yeah, thank you. And and then I'm not an obvious choice really to be the CEO of a world governing body, and like you, Chris, I completely feel the responsibility on my shoulders. Mm-hmm. And when the headhunters approached me, I thought about it long and hard, and in the recent council meeting, I basically was talking about what our priority should be, and World Sailing have done some things very, very well in the past, and World Sailing have got to improve in certain areas. So really, so my initial thoughts weren't really crystallized until I got into the interview process and understood more. I was more involved in World Sailing when I was working with Laser and was working with the late Jeff Martin to get the radial into the Olympic Games. So I was more familiar then, but that was a long time ago. So I didn't. Those thoughts sort of crystallized after, and are still coming together of what needs to be done. But in simplistic terms, I think financially, World Sailing is not in a great state, which is not right for the governing body of the entire sport of sailing, where there's a lot of wealth and a lot of money. Then we're too reliant on the Olympic side. So actually, just getting us on a good firm footing financially is one area, and then making sure that we serve our stakeholders well. And then obviously that's a huge topic, because we've got to determine which of those stakeholders are priority one, and what does serving them well mean. We're not the ones making all of the decisions. We're not the ones who are doing everything. We're the ones sort of enabling, if you like, in certain areas. And then what's coming up often is the actual governance of the sport, and it's old in our federation, and it needs looking at. And the third block is participation and the promotion of our sport and participation. So if you look at actually, and I think what attracted the board of directors to me as a candidate is actually what we've done in those areas. So in terms of sponsorship, in the finance section, in terms of serving our customers, I've had plenty of experience in that. And then with regards to participation, looking at the model that we had in Oman, and taking the good bits of that, and essentially extrapolating it across different parts of the globe. So like I said, I do feel a responsibility. I feel a bit underqualified. I feel like
good to keep the fire under your own feet.
Yeah. But you know what? We've got so many wonderful people in our sport who are prepared to give their knowledge. Without embarrassing Andrew, we could use Andrew as a perfect example. Putting his own resources into development of certain areas of the sport. And if I don't know the answer to a question, which is often, then we've got a bunch of contacts around the world who will know the answer and are very happy to help.
Yeah, absolutely. And that community is so broad, and it's getting broader the more exposure the sport gets. And that brings me to one of the main reasons why you're here with Andrew and myself, is that hydrofoiling, foiling sports have done something really unique for sailing. And, you saw in the talking points, one of our first things to talk about was, I guess we'll skip through it, about when hydrofoiling really came on a serious radar screen of world sailing, because that was kind of before your time, when the 2013 America's Cup came about and kind of just blew the roof off of the exposure to the sport, and it happened to be through hydrofoiling, the America's Cup, of course, but they used hydrofoils, and that was a multiplier. And so I guess Andrew talked about it last fall a lot, which is that he looks at hydrofoiling being at the crest of a wave, in our sport. And we're here to challenge you, David, and ask about how World Sailing views that angle of the sport. Some people consider it not real sailboat racing or sailing, period. And does it have its place in World Sailing? But where is the value in it, and what can it do for the sport? Maybe before I just told you, I shared a whole bunch of ideas, but maybe Andrew can share your philosophy in terms of the relationship with foiling and the sport, and really World Sailing, because you challenged World Sailing last year to take a good hard look at the opportunities that foiling presents.
Well, I think that there's a paradox at play, and I suspect that David, I'm putting words into his mouth, but he'll put me right quickly if I'm wrong. But I mean, as you know, in 2 or 3 of the sessions we've had already today, Chris, when we've been talking with various people from the sail surfing community, sail foiling community. Yeah. I was one of the people who was really supportive of the mixed offshore doubles for the Paris Games, and was disappointed that that didn't get in. That having been said, certainly when I was here at Foiling Week in September, the thing that got me then and got me again at 6:30 this morning when I went for my walk for an hour along the front here was just to see how busy the lake here was at Garda, with people on every different type of foiling something. And that was moths, maybe 4 or 5 moths I could see out there. There were people with kites, there were people with wings, there were people with windsurfers. There were hundreds. I mean, this wasn't a Saturday afternoon in Scarborough, my hometown, of people maybe going out on a few keel boats and doing the same thing that they've done, going down the cans before going back into their yacht club and downing a few beers. This was where the sport is attracting people, and certainly at Foiling Week here, David, the thing that really I saw yesterday afternoon, something that warmed my heart, and I think would do the same to you. There was a session with being held by Paul Goodison and Tom Slingsby, two of the biggest names in the sport, and giving of their time freely to share their knowledge and experience, and the fact that here we are at Foiling Week with people who have just come out of America's Cup campaigns, involved in Sail GP, have got Olympic medals in the boats that we know well. Paul, of course, was a laser sailor, wasn't he?
He was.
You then think, wow, the direction of travel of the sport is to do with foiling. That's where it's at. So the genie is out of the bottle, and there's no putting it back. And it's how, I guess, the challenge is, how do we collectively, in some form or other, otherwise it's just world sailing being used as the usual kicking post, how do we join the keelboat fraternity, of which I've been part? A lot of my formative sailing was in half-tonners and quarter-tonners and stuff, through to where the direction of travel appears to be with people jumping onto anything that will get out of the water, break the surface, and fly through the air. And anyway, Chris, I probably not really helped you there, because I've sort of gone off on a little diatribe.
No, but you have. I was going to say, sorry to interrupt you there, but I guess the question, and it leads into my question, which is, David, we know that critics will say, hey, and we were told before that foiling isn't necessary for everyone, and it's not going to take over the sport. So when we look at the mix of Olympic classes, almost half being foiling, hydrofoiling for 2024, that's a bold move, and I congratulate World Sailing for doing that. But where is foiling in every conversation in World Sailing right now? Administration, race management, class approval, You know, what's the view on foiling right now from World Sailing?
I think you said earlier, is foiling sailing, and world sailing's in no doubt that well, some people might be, but I'm talking from myself here.
Yeah.
Sailing,
this is just you right now.
Yeah, this is me, in my opinion. Yeah, representing world sailing, but it's no doubt it's sailing. It's a vessel being propelled through the water using wind as its fuel, and it's sailing. And we'll say, we're not talking about it in every conversation, but we are talking about it a lot, because there's lots of different elements that you've spoken about that need to be addressed. Like safety being one of them. So yes, it's in lots of conversations and in lots of different elements. And as you quite rightly said, 50% of our classes in Paris are effectively going to be foiling now that the offshore was rejected. So that's a very, very significant number. And as a sport, it's really, really important that us, as the world governing body of the sport, move with the times. You can't, if you don't move with the times, then the risk is much, much greater than doing so, in my mind.
Well, that's a great point. And this is something that I want to talk with you about. We talk about, especially this year for Foiling Week, but every year for Foiling Week, is equity, inclusion, diversity. Our logo is "We stand with pride." We stand with pride every year, but we stand with that community and the global community every year. And the one thing that we're noticing, it's still hard. The journalists that we had on earlier today, other sailors that are influencers, the challenge that we have is identifying the diversity in our sport, because we know it exists, but it's not super strong at times. And right now we are 3 white men over the age of 46. You guys are close. Yeah. And so it's hard to find, because we have these blind spots, it's hard to find representation to take roles of leadership, and to give us that diversity of thought that John Quell from the Magenta Project told us that we need. Just like every corporation in the world knows they need that diversity of thought, not just through gender, not just through people of color, but just generally experience. So my question to you is, Andrew's been saying, are us white men in these positions capable of making the best decisions in terms of the direction of our sport? And I know that there's a board and there's a council, and that's super diverse. There are more and more women in positions of leadership in our sport than a lot of other sports. Is there a concern on the council level, on the board level, and I'll bring this back to foiling, just making these decisions or being aware of the opportunities? Is there a thought that World Sailing needs to figure out a way to get a younger and more diverse group into the leadership?
Yeah. And that comes up more often than foiling in our discussions. Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. And as you said, we've got we're gender equal in the boardroom in World Sailing, and actually the ladies are the powerhouse of the board. We've got some fantastic people there who've done great things in the sport. Corey, who you'll know well, who's passionate about youth. We've got Özlem in Turkey, who is also the president of the Turkish Sailing Federation. We've got Sarah Kenny in Australia, who is a passionate windsurfer. She headed up the event committee for many years, and is she's at the forefront of the sport, still competing windsurfing. We've got Joalla, who's got a couple of Olympic medals, 1 gold, 1 silver.
Yeah, and she's a wing foiler.
massive wing foiler. So we've got all of these voices on the board. and supporting moving the sport forward. So, and I think talking about diversity, and you just mentioned wing foiling.
Yeah.
I think wing foiling is the explosive growth that's having now it's phenomenal, and I think that is actually going to be an entry into the sport, a new entry into the sport. Something like kite surfing, for example. I think kite surfing, you had to have an idea about sailing to start kite surfing, and then you had to learn to fly a kite, and you know, be proficient on a board, and you had to coordinate all these things, because you couldn't, like with wing foiling, with the volume in the board, you can stand on it, hold it up, fall in, and you'll sort of get the thing moving with no knowledge of sailing. So actually, I see that having a place in the development of the sport, globally, and that'll be up to us and our development programs to make sure that we're not. Yes, we'll be going through the traditional routes as well, but I see that as a very, very interesting development route into the sport, especially as the equipment develops and the equipment becomes cheaper. It's very transportable, it's fun, it's exhilarating, and it's a relatively quick but difficult, I understand, I haven't tried it, but a difficult learning curve, but relatively quick. So I see that I can see that in the future just being, you know, entry level and at the highest level.
Well, I want to take that angle. I'm glad you're speaking about it as far as in terms of the experience of learning, and, you know, just something different than what we're used to seeing in sail training, you know, in terms of how people come about it. Eric Antonsen, who's the founder of the Progression Project, which is the largest podcast, one of the only podcasts on hydrofoiling, focuses mostly on surf foiling. And he was saying that the real awesome attraction and the thing that hydrofoiling has done for the surfing community, but also with wing foiling, just like you noted, is it's creating more of a experiential culture and sharing than a competitive culture. And even we had a session with Sarakita and Oda, who are switching to the IQ foil, and they're bringing in that kind of culture of sharing, even though they're into racing, sharing on the beach and being more playful. Does world sailing have the opportunity, with things like wing foiling and with other foiling sports where there aren't competitive series yet, to influence the culture that the sailing community can learn from that? So instead of racing being pretty rigid, maybe shifting some of the formats, shifting some of the way events are held to be more of a festival approach that we talk about in Foiling Week, because we all love to just hang out, and sailing, like the Olympics, is serious business. But can world sailing kind of leverage the fun and excitement of these new sports, including hydrofoiling, into affecting the culture of the whole sport, you know, into a more fun and playful, you know, less competitive?
I think it's a very good point, Chris. And to be honest with you, to my knowledge, we've spent a limited amount of time in that area. The different, like with the kite surfing and foiling, there are the racing and more rigid side of the classes, and there's also what they call the expression side of the classes, which is and I think, yeah, we ought to get more involved in that. We are, as a federation, we're very, very Olympic focused. As I spoke to you early on, and don't get me wrong, we need to be. You know, that's one of the pinnacle. Sorry,
it's your job.
Yeah, and it's one of the pinnacles of the sport of sailing. But you know, we need to be working harder in those areas that you're talking about. And certainly, I mentioned participation, but then that recreational element that you're spoken about, and hanging out, actually, that's going to is a proven fact that'll push participation, because unless you're that person who doesn't get daunted by, you know, the daunting whole racing,
registering and following all those rules.
Exactly. And if it's more forward thinking, but we need to be more involved in that area than we are now, I think.
Yeah, and I really I agree with you, obviously. I think that when I use that term leverage, like you said, you're recognizing, and we all recognize, the explosive growth of certain hydrofoil classes or disciplines, if you want to call them that, or happenings, evolutions. And the World Sailing's involvement with that, they have control over how they put events forward. Like I said, we had a session called Before They Were Pros. So it's an awesome look at the wind sports foiling world, where influencers, people on Instagram and riders and manufacturers have a greater influence on how the sport is presented than traditional magazines or other media outlets. So those are, there's something to be learned from them.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And also seeing when I was in Oman, we hosted a World Championships, Formula Kite World Championships, and what you notice there is that it was a much younger age than all of the other sailing events we hosted there in Oman, and a nice mix of male and female, and so I think we can't do it at the expense of the other areas of our sport, but for sure this is a very, very important part of our sport.
Absolutely. And Andrew, we have to kind of slowly wind things up a little bit, but what are you most encouraged about? I mean, let's just talk about the Olympics too. I'm encouraged that it's, almost 50% are hydrofoiling, because we know it's drawing an awful lot of attention, and it's challenging. You ask any of the athletes, and it's an awesome thing, to focus on. It's like sailing on steroids, just the decision-making skills are so much faster. What are you most encouraged about? And then I'll ask the same to David.
Well, encouraged about, well, I think there's much to be encouraged about within the Olympics anyway, because it clearly is as we see, I mean, if you look at diversity within, I think we lost you. You disappeared, Chris. Oh,
I'm here.
Diversity within the sport of sailing, then I think we'll find that the Olympic side of it is probably already one of the most diverse. In fact, you don't get so much challenge within that, because they, as it were, the boys and the girls and the different classes tend to move through together, and they all respect each other. That's one of the least. So I think there's something to be celebrated there. I think it's also to be celebrated that if your expression about if the future is about the youth and about the kids and so on, then if that's where we're seeing that people are then coming out into to take up foiling as part of what they do for their fun, I think that's again to be encouraged. And I think you're probably quite a big friend of Ian Walker, I should think, for David. And Ian Walker certainly back to that participation and people enjoying the sport. I think this is part of what I've been seeing coming through the language of world sailing, and probably since David arrived, was that whole thought process about, we need to celebrate the people. This is fun. This should be about fun. And people can go on to do the performance side of it. If they've enjoyed themselves, they'll stay with the sport. And whether they're going to be a recreational sailor or they're going to be a performance sailor. But certainly Ian, and I think it's much like the Norwegian Nordic sports thing, isn't it? You get the kids to enjoy their time on the snow, and don't start putting them into competition until they're quite a bit older. Well, I think the same applies for sailing. And I think it's also why there's so many other classes within sailing where there's less pressure. And I hear it, for instance, with the 505 fleet, where they just enjoy themselves. It's a huge fleet. They don't need to be in the Olympics. In fact, Moss, actually, they don't really want to be in the Olympics. They don't want to be constrained. And I wonder whether, David, within that, in the direction you're able to take world sailing, whether it's being able to focus on what is good and what's important, and that the elite side of it perhaps at times it's become the tail wagging the dog, and it should be that the dog is what we're talking about here, and the tail is something that comes out the back end of it.
Yeah, I used that expression just today with Michael and Alistair, who are our Olympic managers. I think I echo what you're saying there, Andrew. I think with the Olympic Games, it's very, very diverse in terms of our universality. And as you know, by the time we get to Paris, we're going to be on a 50-50 level. So 50% men, 50% women. At an athlete level and an event level, it's 50% for male and 50% for female. So that whole diversity is going at the right angle. And yes, I've known Ian Walker for many years, and I'm a huge fan of his. I think he what he's done in the sport, whether that be from a charitable point of view, an Olympic point of view, an offshore point of view, or now sort of leading the British team. I think he's an amazing guy, and I think so. And I listen to what he's also a very, very smart guy. So when he speaks, I'm in listening mode. I think going back to your question, Chris, I think the with regards to foiling and sailing and what the opportunities are.
Yes.
Andrew spoke about the kids and the youth. Well, when we were kids, we all wanted to fly, didn't we? We all wanted to fly. Most kids want to fly. So
paper airplanes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think now the opportunity that we've got in particularly when we get to Paris, and we've got the IQ foils and the kites and the NACRAs, the media appeal and the job of the Olympics. The job of the Olympics for us, I think, the job of the Olympics is one of the principal jobs of it is the aspirational element, and then when you're looking at these Formula kites traveling at the speeds that they're traveling at, it's mesmerizing, and it's going to be mesmerizing for the kids, and they're going to be looking at that saying, I want to do that. And I think that's the big opportunity that we've got, and it's going to provide, I think, we'll see, time will tell. But I think if we get the media element right of that, then it could have a huge impact in our sport in general.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, it's really hard to make a real prediction, but we do know that the way that the sport is presented, I mean, Sunset and Vine does a lot of the presentation of our sport visually, and through the Olympics, helping them out, I think. And it's beautiful. I mean, Christophe Duby, when he was the head of sport or something like that, from the IOC, he said, we love sailing. It has the best visuals of all the Olympic Games. But we do know that viewership is a challenge for our sport, and figuring out ways to visually present it. And I do think that as a journalist, one of the elements I think is missing from that presentation is the characters. We know that the sailors are awesome, driven people, and we aspire to be like them. And we work so hard at presenting the sport and how the sport works that we forget about the human element that professional sports broadcasting does so well. We know so much about the other athletes in the other sports, and we know so little about our sailing athletes. And sailors are focused individuals. I think when you bring in hydrofoiling and you bring in new audiences, I think that gives us an opportunity to bring in the human element, because it's something fascinating, new, and bringing more attention, and it's new. So you always want to find out what the pioneers are doing, right? Those are the coolest people.
I think that's also a very good point, Chris. I think, if we go back 40 years and you look at golf and sailing, and the golf fraternity, they sort of promoted and supported the professionals, where actually I think as a sailor, you were kind of penalized if you were a professional way back then.
Yes.
And I think we've got a real, you've just spoken about Goody and Tom, so let's just use them as an example. We could use anyone, and we've got so many people in our sport, but those two people, their work ethic, their dedication, the knocks that they've had, they're role models. There's as many, and just I've got to know Joella a lot better more recently, since she's been sat on our board. And most people, if you're outside of the sailing world, you don't know these people, and we need to be in a position to actually use them to promote our sport, because we've got so many wonderful people. And in fact, I can guarantee one thing: I wouldn't be in this job if it wasn't for these people. And I look back at I look at those people, I research them, and and they give me inspiration. So I'm sure that's happening for other people.
Right, absolutely.
And just going back to your media point,
yeah.
I think we're going to have to move with the times, and the coverage that we're going to get in the Olympic Games, in Tokyo and in Paris, it should be brilliant. I mean, the IOC are pushing us. They want to appeal to a younger audience. We're using esports as well as another platform, and OBS are looking at ways that they can be innovative in terms of their broadcast and their production. And outside of you imagine with those speeds and drones, we're going to be not in the Olympics drones I'm talking, but the use of kites and drones and cameras on the kite strings, and we've already got spectacular footage which go viral on social media. And I think that now these things, we've got social media, we've got this great footage, we've got drones, we've got the speed, we've got the adrenaline, we've got the young people, and I think when all that comes together, then I can't see it doing anything other than a load of good for our sport, and I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. And it's a new product, right? The foiling and the sailing is a new product. And I want to keep going with this for a second. And Andrew, your impression of the Vendée Globe, another a large event that has leveraged the increased interest with hydrofoils. That surfing is new to the Olympics this year. And I consider I'm very fascinated and curious to see how the World Surf League has presented surfing, and how the surf federations have presented it, and how we're going to see surfing in the Olympics. And I'm just as interested to see how we're going to see hydrofoiling in 2024. It's an opportunity to look at a new product with some new people, and maybe some younger people too. And do you think that World Sailing has an opportunity to work with the surfing federations to take a good look at how something new is presented? I mean, I know that the surfing coverage, I can't wait to see it, because it's like in Nagano or Salt Lake City, whenever the first snowboarding events came out, blew our minds.
Yeah.
I'll still watch downhill skiing, but man, to watch Johnny Mosley or some of the female half pipers, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it, and I'm getting goosebumps about thinking about surfing, and I want to get those goosebumps thinking about the hydrofoil events in 2024. Is there an opportunity to work with people like the surf federations to kind of synergize presenting these new fun things? I know they're different water sports, but
they're massively different. They're massively different water sports, but they're not massively in some disciplines.
Yeah.
But I hadn't thought about it, to be honest with you, Chris. But I think I'm sure there is, and I'm sure we can learn from each other. And one of our council members, John Phipp, who he lives down in Sydney, and I think he's half Fijian, half Australian, but he was talking about a board meeting in one of the surf federations where they've all got wet hair and come in flip-flops.
A board meeting.
Coming in flip-flops and board shorts, and they just come out of the when I said to our board members, that's what we should be doing, having our board meetings after we've done a Wednesday evening.
Yeah. How primed are you to talk about the sport after an awesome day of sailing, or even an okay day of sailing?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting though, David. One of your predecessors, from probably 2 or 3 predecessors ago, I think, you might have been there, but I think that person, I was told, went to a World Sailing Annual Conference and came in down in his in equivalent of board shorts or something, and much to the consternation of the old guard, who pretty much wrote him off, I think, as a direct result. As you know, with me, I can be very comfortable in a pair of shorts and flip flops. And it's funny, isn't it? Because somehow we've got to carry that old guard with us, and yet we've got to appeal to the new guard. And I don't envy you, I must admit, in trying to connect those positions, because I think I used the expression earlier on about it's easy for World Sailing to be the kicking post. I mean, when I attend something like Sailing Illustrated or some of the other online things, and people start sounding off about World Sailing, they almost, it's like they're characterizing somebody as an individual there, that it's a nebulous person that they're trying to have a go at, when in fact World Sailing, as an executive, you're appointed by the member nations, and the votes that have been cast by them, and the decisions that they take. I mean, it's you are operating in quite a goldfish bowl, are you not?
Yeah, well, I think we are in a goldfish bowl, Andrew, and I think your points, well, there's many points you've made there. I think but first of all, you're looking at these, what we're calling the old guard and the new innovative end of the sport. And there's it's not an either or. There's an absolute place for all of them. And then with regards to us being the kicking post, we are the kicking post, and we always will be, because we're an easy target, and I've got to be. Some of it you just got to let it go, and it'd be, personally speaking, it's got to be water off a duck's back when you're getting accused of doing this, that, and the other, or ruining people's lives, or
right.
Well, for me, I just don't take any of it personally. When I was working in Oman, I asked two questions. Number one, is it right for the country? Number two, is it right for the company? And if the answer to that question was yes, then that was my acid test for making a decision. And here it's quite simple. Is it right for the sport? And does the federation need to be involved in it? And should it be doing it? And if it's yes, you get on with it. And I take the flak. And as Andrew said, I can't remember whether it was 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 predecessors ago. I mean, it's quite a quick turnover of CEOs of World Sailing. So there's one thing for sure, I'll be acting in the best interests of our sport. I'll be speaking positively about our sport, and what people don't understand outside of our world is the people that we've got in it. And it's the people that we've got in the sport, and countless examples of who are doing wonderful things on a voluntary basis. And it's our voluntary body, which and every single council meeting, that's what I start off with. I've just proofread a para press release that's going out tomorrow. I've made sure that that's in there because it's wonderful. But the problem is we have got an element of our sport, people I'm talking, and it's not many, but they're very, very loud, and they're very, very disruptive, and especially through this last period. I mean, I was talking to someone in the IOC, and we are the loudest voice negatively, talking directly to the IOC, and people need to look beyond their own personal agenda, because actually that's creating collateral damage for sailing in that Olympic space, and we need to stop it, and collectively we need to stop it. And how we're going to stop it, I don't know. I'm not going to stop it on my own, but what I am going to say, and I'm aware this interview is going to go out there, and I'm going to say openly that it needs to be stopped. Yeah. Let's have our discussions inside, let's have our discussions in the room, and let's argue, fuss and fight in the room, but out there we need to be portraying the wonderful message that our sport can deliver. And I've seen it firsthand. I've seen social change firsthand coming from sailing, and we need to make sure it's those messages that we're getting out there, and not people moaning because we haven't done X, Y, and Z.
I think it's so true what you say, that definitely that's the direction things need to go. And the fact that you're right now, we're speaking directly to our Foiling Week community, which gets aggregated out to our sailing community, and beyond, because we have so many stakeholders that go beyond some of the sailing channels in Foiling Week. And I think that so many people it's a blessing and a curse that the sailing universe is so friendly, and it's a family, right? You sail against people from around the world if you're lucky enough, and we grow up together, and we share the best days and the worst days of our lives on and off the water, but we're around each other so much. So it's a family. And I think the curse is that people feel very comfortable to say exactly what they think with or without a lot of information. But the other side of it is, and this is what, I don't want, I'm part of Foiling Week, and I think it's really important. And we know now, it's kind of proven that foiling is bringing a lot of great energy into the sport. We noticed Sarah Kita, a 12-time world champion in freestyle windsurfing, is more excited than ever about her sports, because she's seeing people, she's meeting the whole racing and Olympic community for the first time, who've never done course racing, and she's just loving it. And she sees people on the beach in her sport every day of her life that just come up to her, non-sailors, people from every socioeconomic background. And she's saying that foiling is breaking down these barriers and bringing a lot of people to her. And I think that this is, I agree with you, what you say. There's a lot of negative commentary out there, but as the sport gets exposed to more people, and as foiling gets people excited, like I was telling you, I'm getting goosebumps. I don't very rarely get goosebumps about talking about some sit down sailing. Even though I love it to death, it's more cerebral for me. I think that this is an opportunity for everyone to take that energy and use it. And like you're saying, it's going to, in the hydrofoil space, the surfing community has traditionally been a little combative for wave scarcity, is a term that's used, and localism. Well, they know that in the world right now, the hydrofoil surf community, besides maybe a very small pocket in a very competitive zone in California, that's all gone away. The community is so friendly, sharing on Instagram, sharing the waves. There's enough for everyone. Johnny Heineken and the guys and girls out in San Francisco, all of a sudden, where it was one wave to ride, there's a whole bay full of waves for everyone to share. And I think hydrofoil in all the different spaces is inspiring us. And I think it's, part of it's that lack of competitiveness, but part of it is just being excited and happy to see something new. And I think that, I think people are starting to recognize that. I think World Sailing's, I'm getting up on a pulpit here, but I think World Sailing's decisions around hydrofoiling are very progressive. And the only thing I would ask you, David, is we talked about community, about a festival atmosphere, learning from how freestylers and other types of board sports behave on land and run events and the formats. Can there be like a vibe czar at World Sailing that looks at everything that World Sailing does and makes sure everyone's having fun and looking at things the right way? Can you have a vibe officer?
It's a brilliant idea. What, director of vibe? Yeah, we should.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you come in and you're like, take that tie off, let's go for a sail first. This event needs this, and
I think we, we've spoken about, I think that there's absolutely no downside with us pushing and promoting. We need to make sure that we're on top of it. And that's not just us World Sailing, but the various classes with regards to safety. Now these boats and these boards and are moving significantly quicker, and they're more dangerous. And we've got we need to make. So when I say there's no downside, I think
we can't forget about that.
We can't forget about that. We need to be aware of it. And we've got subcommittees now working in different areas with sort of specific protective gear, and I mean they're talking. It's mandate to wear an impact vest for IQ foil. That's the first in the Olympic class, and we're sort of in the details of that. Yeah. But there's no downside. There's no downside to us pushing it and promoting it. I think there's only upside. And it's not at the expense of other areas of the sport. It's different. Like you said, it's a lot more cerebral if you're you're going across oceans or around big cans in around a bay in displacement boats. It's not at the expense of, and it needs to be. So maybe we should have that. We should have a happy vibe officer in world sailing. What a great job that would be.
Yeah. No, it needs to be someone more diverse than me, that's for sure. I have blind spots. Well, I'm going to end this on asking you 2 questions, and then let Andrew have one of the last words. That what are you most excited about for the future of our sport right now? And then the last question is, when are you going sailing next?
What am I most excited about? There's so many things I'm excited about. I mean, the impact that we could have with the, as I said earlier, with all of the media that we can get from this area of the sport and have it promote new people into the sport. I'm working on with one of the board members, working on a huge development program, which will be game changing if we get that off the ground. Talking about a lot of the thing, I've given you some snippets of what it might involve in today in this interview. So I'm really excited about that. And there's loads I'm excited about. I need this job's very, very different for me because it's less hands-on than I'm used to.
Yeah.
But knowing trying to get people aligned and us all pulling in the same direction. I think our sport needs to punch higher in terms of vis-a-vis other sports. So if I can make a contribution in that area, I'm excited about that.
Cool.
You're talking about Ian Walker. I was meant to be sailing with him last week. Him and Andrew Priest from Sunset and Vine, and we were going to have an offshore meeting down on the south coast, but unfortunately that fell through because it was blowing dogs off chains. So I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to go sailing before. I'm being quite careful before I travel to Tokyo because we've got very strict COVID rules, and so I'm just sort of restricting travel to a minimum. I might get a day out on the water before I travel, but if not, it can wait till I get back.
Awesome. Well, report back from Tokyo for us. We keep forgetting that there's an actual Olympic Games coming up, and we have a hydrofoiling class in it, the first ever in the Olympic sailing.
Yeah.
So that's exciting to me too. So please report back on how it's going down there and if everyone's having fun.
I will do, indeed. I will do.
And Andrew, as the sage of our group, closing words: world sailing, hydrofoiling, Lake Garda today.
Does that mean I've got the most grey hair, or just years on my belt, or notches on my belt?
You got to keep it to less than 2 minutes.
No, I just think it's great that David's made himself available for the session to do with Foiling Week, and clearly it is such an important part of the future of the sport. And we wish you well, David. I think from Foiling Week for all the hard work that you're doing and taking the brickbats in and amongst it. It's at times must feel quite thankless, but what I know, having observed you all the time and seen you in Oman, you built a lot of support around you because you're true to yourself and you're true to the sport of sailing. So I think that will bear testimony, and through that you will win through.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That's lovely to hear. And the only reason I'm not there with you this week is because of those restrictions I was talking about earlier. But next Foiling Week, perhaps we'll do this in person.
Cool. Yeah, and it's great. We will, and it's great to remember, David, that you were on the beaches teaching people how to sail. And it's so funny when you follow your passion, you get further and further away than things you really like to do. But it's that perspective that allows you to do what you do with the board and the council and all the different arms of world sailing. We can't have this sport without you. And if anyone ever tells you that you're out of touch, we'll get you the Foiling Week shirt to prove that you're not out of touch. So
excellent. Well, it was a pleasure to meet you, Chris, and thanks very much. And nice to see you again, Andrew.
Awesome.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much, David.
You're
And
welcome.
that's it for our World Sailing session. Hopefully we'll have, multiple World Sailing sessions at next year's Foiling Week, and we get David and some of the other staff members. Let's work down from the top down, because I think that David will tell you that underneath him, there are hundreds of people working their butts off, and a lot of volunteers giving a lot of their time to the sport on every level. So Foiling Week thanks you, and we will get on to the next sessions for the next day. Thank you very much, David. Andrew, as usual, thanks for holding down the fort at Lake Garda. I'll get there soon, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks again. Bye now.